All right, we're going to go ahead and get started then. It's 1 o'clock. I want to thank everyone for attending this week's question and answer webinar. And I especially appreciate the fact that you're all here, given that this inevitable thing happened that my webinar is up against an Apple keynote for something minor I think they're probably going to talk about today, maybe a phone or something. So, I'm actually quite shocked that there's this many people here, and I'm sure plenty of you are got an eye on the Apple keynote in another window to see what cool gadgets they're gonna talk about. But to that end, we here at Zojo figured, well, if Apple's going to be hyping up iPhones and iOS and stuff, we might want to talk a little bit about the iOS support that's coming in Zojo. So we put up a new blog post today. And if you haven't checked it out, you want to head over to the Zojo blog. And it is right here, zojo.com/blog. And, whenever this webinar is done, after you've watched the Apple stuff or whenever, you can watch this 10-minute video that Geoff put together. And it goes through pretty much demoing an app that's made with Zojo that's running on an iPhone and then also an iPad later towards the end. And the blog post has a little bit explanation around that, and also a screenshot of a Zojo app that is running on iOS 7 that you can see is already taking over the new iOS 7 UI because we're primarily using native controls for Zojo when it creates iOS apps. So it'll switch over to the new UI automatically when it's running on that platform. Now, if you saw the title for today, this is a Q&A webinar, and we're also going to have, probably in about half an hour, Geoff Perlman, founder and CEO of Xojo, is going to pop in and also take some questions. But for the first half hour, unfortunately, you just have me taking your questions. So I'm going to just take what you got. I'm feeling especially chatty today, so ask whatever you feel like, and I will answer what I can. So let me just move on over here to the question list. All right, first easy question. Is the keynote live? I presume you're referring to the Apple keynote, and my sources are telling me that they are not streaming it live, so you have to go to the usual websites that type in the little updates for you. All right, here's a question from, I'm going to try and pronounce names today, so please forgive me if I butcher your name and completely mispronounce it, and also feel free to correct me with simple soundings of the name in the Q&A window so that I can try and pronounce it correctly. So here I have a question from Oblio, who told me how to pronounce it, and hopefully I'm still doing that right. And the question is, saw the iOS preview, so he's already seen the video, and will we have an OpenGL view in the future? Well, we don't specifically announce future stuff, but I think it's pretty likely that we're going to map as many controls as we have now on desktop and web over to iOS if there's an equivalent there. And OpenGL seems like it would also be a candidate. But you do not expect that one in the first release of the iOS support. All right, let's see here. Got another question here from Mars, and it says, how do I find the definition or location of some variable function or method in my code? Well, that's a good question. Let's just jump over here and open up something. So we'll open up just a sample app here that has a fair amount of code so we can see how that works. So if you're looking at some code, and let's see here if I can find something that has right here. You're looking at, this is a property on the class. You can right click on it like I just did here, and it pops up the contextual menu, and there's always a go-to thing that shows up down here that you can click, and it'll find where the item is and select it in the navigator for you. And that works on properties, methods. So if I have one of these things that happens to, like right here, find customers by ID, I can just right click on that, and I can use the go-to, and it tells you right where it is. That's in the orders database class, and I can just click that, and it will open it up and select it for you. that's a great way to follow code, particularly if you happen to be given code that maybe you didn't write and you're trying to follow, its overall flow, code flow, whatnot, and you want to see what calls what. Another little cool tidbit you can do is, in addition to right-clicking on that, you can also, on OS 10, you can hold down the Command key and just double-click it, and it does the same thing. And you can do a similar thing on Windows and Linux, although the Command key you hold down, or the special key you hold down, is escaping me at the moment. It might be Control. I don't recall, but there is also a shortcut key that you can hold down. So that's how you look up stuff. That's pretty easy, and it's a great tip to help you work with projects. All right, this next question here. I think this is regarding the iOS thing. It says Opengl was mentioned, but is there any 2D graphics library suiting to game development? No, Zojo doesn't include any 2D graphics libraries for game development at this point. We don't have any for the desktop or web either. There is a third-party set of classes called the Super Sprite Control that I don't know if that's been updated for Zojo. I haven't actually tested that with Zojo, but that in the past has been a pretty common tool that people use for 2D game-like stuff. I don't know that we have any specific plans for 2D graphics for games on the iOS side, seeing as Zojo is not really a game-making tool. But certainly that's the sort of thing you can request, but it's definitely not going to be in the first version. All right, next question that we have here. Does Zojo have native access to web services? Well, yeah, kind of. There's a couple ways you can do that. Let's, again, go to the new project here. And we're going to go to Communication, Internet. And there's two ways you can call web services in Zojo. The first is to use the SOAP classes. So if you have a traditional web service with a WSGL that you can use the SOAP method class right here, provide it with the address of the service, and then call the method on it, and you'll get back a result. So if this web service is still live, that's one problem with including examples that refer to web services. Sometimes these things go down. So here, this particular one, we'll see if we can get a conversion from euros to US dollars, or if we're going to get timeout. We did get one, so there we go. Euros are worth 1.3 US dollars. So that's really easy way to use web services that are out there. The other type of web services that are pretty popular nowadays are REST web services. And generally speaking, you're going to just access those using the HTTP socket or the secure socket. And then we have some examples of that as well down here. If I can remember, the Twilio one, I think, sends an SMS message. I'm trying to remember what this one does here. This one doesn't use a socket. It actually uses the curl command line. And of course, curl is actually CURL, which is this is built into OS 10 and Linux for sending HTTP requests and getting data back. Xojo also has the HTTP socket that can do the same thing, although now that I remember, I'm looking at this, that it did not work with Twilio for this particular feature. But I imagine there's other examples around here. Auto discovery, simple chat. We had a Yahoo one, but their API went down. I think the answer call one might be another example. But yes, certainly you would just create a new HTTP socket, and then you would do a get or a post. However, the API is defined, providing the parameters you need, get the results back, and do what you want. And if you wanted to implement your own web services, you can also do that by creating your own web app using Xojo. And we have a project for that, of course. And you can see examples of that with something like the quote service here that shows you how you would use the web application handle special URL event handler to accept web service requests, process information, and send back data. All right, let's move on to another question here from Oblio. And this question is about access to gradient colors on image objects, and is this something Xojo can do? Xojo does not have a built-in way to create gradient colors. You kind of have to do that yourself. I do have that on my to-do list to put together an example that would show you how to do that. I don't have one immediately handy that I can show you, nor do I know that code well enough to type that off the top of my head. But so the answer to that is simply, well, no, Zojo can't do that right now, but I'll get an example project included. And certainly in the meantime, you feel free to ask on the forum or something like that. I'm sure many people have created their own little modules or classes that do that sort of thing, and people love sharing. All righty, just scrolling down the list, getting lots of questions today. That's great. All right, here's a question. Has any work been done on Android support yet? If it's even going to be done. That's from David. We get a lot of questions about Android support. And no work has been done on Android. Right now, we're completely focused on the iOS work. But it seems pretty likely, not that we've officially announced or said anything, but it seems pretty likely that after iOS, the next platform we're going to want to look at is Android. It's pretty obvious that that is incredibly popular. We get a ton of requests for it. It's used all over the place. It's kind of a no-brainer, but it's quite a bit different than iOS in its frameworks, and so that will require more work, but the iOS work is going to give us the compiler we need, the LLVM compiler, so we can compile to ARM processors, which is what these mobile devices use. And that will get us a long way towards Android support. All right, here's a question again from Mars, and the question is there a way to show the documentation, or at least the parameters for a function, whether it's predefined or user-defined, within the IDE without having to see its definition? Well, I'm not entirely sure I understand the question, but at the very least, if you see here when I'm moving the mouse cursor over the print method here, it's part of the request class. You can see at the very bottom, try and do this without it going over anything else, which is tricky. But you can see down here, look down here at the bottom when I'm moving. You can see that it shows you the class name, the method name, and what the parameters are. So that's usually the easiest way to see at a quick glance what you need for parameters and, or return types or whatever. If you go over a variable that's declared, it'll tell you its type, that sort of thing. So that's usually the quickest way to get at it. And of course, you can always right-click on things and just pick the help, and it'll take you right to the language reference page that has all the details. What's shown down here is only the first definition. So if any of these methods are overloaded and have multiple signatures for different type of parameters, unfortunately the area at the bottom is only going to show one of those. So you're going to need to right click and then go to the help to see all of them. All right, here, not really a question, but a comment from James said he did use Super Sprite with Real Basic at the time. And yes, many years ago, Real Basic, I think, came with a control, some sort of sprite control. And then that was spun off to the Super Sprite third-party product that is still available. And we got a link here I'm going to share. I'll type this into the Safari window so people can see that. And this is a cool 2D box game port for Zojo from Big Daddy Surf. We'll let that think while I check what the next question is. I haven't read this, but definitely want to check out this website if 2D graphics and any gaming related stuff is something you're interested in. I'll have to make a note to review that. All right, Lewis asks, in Real Studio, you could click on a method name in the left menu, and one of the clickable options in the pop-up was Find Method Name. Is this available in Xojo? That's a good question. I do not know. I can't say I use that much in Real Studio. Does not sound like something that I remember or have written up in the docs, so I'm going to guess no, it is not available. But yeah, we don't have a sort of find thing here. And if you select it and open the find, yeah, no, it looks like that is not in Xojo. So certainly, if that's something you think would be really useful or helpful, by all means, create a feedback request on that so that we can get that reviewed and possibly scheduled for an upcoming release. All right, here's a question from James, is how will Xojo be handling app distribution in iOS? I would assume you'll still need a valid Apple ID. Will it be needed to debug programs? How does it tie to the Xcode emulator? Those are all great questions, very, very specific, which means I won't be able to get into too much details at this point because we're still developing things. Obviously, to distribute anything on Apple's App Store, you need an iOS developer account. So you're gonna have to sign up for that. That's $100 a year. You have to pay that every year to keep your app in the store. If you stop paying, Apple removes your apps from the store. So that's an absolute given. You can, however, run and debug your apps using the simulator. And you don't need Apple ID accounts for that. You just need to have downloaded the simulator, which is included with Apple's Xcode development tools. And the debugger will work just as you expect it to work, how it works using desktop and web apps. It'll just work. All right, we got a question here from Mars. Is there an example that shows how to package external libraries, executable tools, such as an external curl build to run on Windows? Yeah, well, kinda. I mean, certainly on the OS X side, packaging is generally done within the app bundle. I can't say generally, but it's often done that way. So you put any items you need in the app bundle and you extract them when the app first runs and put them somewhere where you can access them. So that's relatively straightforward. On the Windows side, you're going to be wanting to use an installer. And well, I talked about installers a bit last week, but we do have at least one thing you can refer to here in the documentations to get you started. We got a page here with a sample script that works with the InnoSetup installer. And you can start with something like this. And this will just show you how to pull in the default files that a Xojo-made app has, its exe and its libs. But you can add folders for other things, resources, or any other external things. And you can have those pulled into the installer. You can have them written out to certain parts of Windows, depending on how you want this to install. You can have these things prompt you for admin privileges or whatever. So, I mean, you would do that using an installer. It's not like any of that would be Xojo specific, of course. You'd have to do that with any app that's built using any tool. But this script here would probably get you started with setup. And of course, there's another installer, advanced installer on Windows that also is pretty good to use and has more of a graphical setup screen. So I'd take a look at both of those in this script here. All right, David asked the question here, can you run more than one web app on the same port but with different URL paths? No, I don't think so. Port is the port. The URL paths, I mean, if you're running standalones, there is no URL path. It's just the URL and the port. And the path stuff that's passed along at the end, it still goes through the same port. So the same app is going to respond to it. All right, let's see here. A question from James. The web apps that Zojo puts out, are they optimized for desktop or do they include mobile compatibility? Well, I'm not entirely sure I understand that. The web apps that Zojo creates are web apps. Oh, you're asking are they optimized for desktop browsers or mobile browsers? I see. Okay. Well, I don't know that they're optimized for either, really. I mean, they rely heavily on JavaScript because they're Ajax based, so they're sending data back and forth behind the scenes as you're interacting with the web apps. Obviously, JavaScript on desktop is way faster than JavaScript on mobile, even with all the improvements that have been done on the mobile side. So that does make web apps tend to run quicker on mobile, but then, I mean, on desktop, but then everything runs quicker on a desktop. They're beefier, use more power, have more power. And you can certainly create web apps for mobile devices now, and you can, design your pages so that they look great on the small screens and whatnot. And the Eddie's Electronics example app that for the web that we include with Zojo does have some stuff you can take a look at to see how you might go about that if you wanted to try that. The web app has some separate pages that are set up for mobile that are thrown up when a small screen device is used, and you can see them here in the mobile folder. And these are used in place of the big screens when it's connecting to a large screen device. All right, I'm just checking the time here. That's good. I have to keep an eye on the attendee list to see when Geoff pops in so I can unmute him. So let's move on through the questions here. Still got a few in the queue. All right, what's the estimated date for Xojo Cloud in order to deploy the web apps? Well, the estimated date, estimated time frame this year. I don't have a specific estimated date. We're continuing to work on Xojo Cloud. We really want to get that out there for people to be able to incredibly easily deploy their web apps. But for the time being, you're still going to have to figure out how to set up your own virtual private server to deploy the web apps. All right, let's check in some more questions here. James is mentioning that there used to be a third-party OpenGL plugin too, but he doesn't recall the name. Fortunately, I don't either. But the OpenGL surface control that's included with Xojo does provide you with access to pretty much everything OpenGL that you need, but that does mean you need to, pretty much study how to program in OpenGL. All right, here's a question from Oblio. In list boxes, can images be added to cells other than the first column? That's a great question. Yes, absolutely. Images can be added anywhere you want in a list box. But the trick is you can't do that using the row picture method of the list box. If you use row picture, the image is always added to the first column. It's not even the first column. It's kind of the first pre-column, but it's always there on the left-hand side. If you want to show images in other columns, you just have to draw them yourself using one of the event handlers. And if I have a list box on this thing here, I will open the event handler list. And I'm looking at the wrong project. I thought I had the desktop one. I got the web one. That won't help. All right, go to the event handlers for the desktop one. And you can see here, there are a variety of paint events. In particular, the background paint and the text paint ones will allow you to draw whatever you want using the graphics object that's supplied right within the cell. So you can use that to draw whatever you want. And if you're really clever, you could actually use this to draw an entire image over multiple cells by just, essentially slicing and dicing it so that you show the appropriate pieces in each individual cell. Next week's webinar is on list boxes. I won't be showing that slicing and dicing trick, but I do have a list box example that we'll be going through that shows how to display graphics in any cell and a whole bunch of other list box related features. So if you use a list box and want to see some of the many things it can do, definitely show up for next week's webinar. All right, more questions here. What example projects would you recommend to look at as models for how to manage resources in a large project? Well, I suppose it depends on what you mean by resources, that stuff in the project or team members. But if you're looking for example projects to take a look at, probably the largest ones that are included are the Eddie's Electronics web and desktop projects. These have the most controls, most code, most organizational structure. So you can certainly start by taking a look at these and seeing how they're organized. I'm continually trying to improve these to, we want these to kind of be reference apps so that they, people can use them as a starting point or a guide to how to lay out things or whatnot. So these are continually updated with every release. So certainly start here. Other things you might want to check are maybe some open source projects that are made with Xojo that some of those can get fairly large and you can start to see how people are creating those. And we have a list of those here on our wiki as well. In, I believe, the community resources page, we have an open source project section. And certainly if you or anyone else start an open source project or know of one that isn't listed here, by all means let me know. I certainly want to list everything here and at least have people make these be discoverable and easy to find. You can see there's quite a few open source projects created with Xojo, and you can just pull these down and take a look at them, and the size varies or whatnot, but they can be great ways to learn. All right, here, next question from James is there an extra cost for hosting web apps yourself? You mentioned a private server. Yeah, I was mentioning if you're hosting web apps, you need a server somewhere. Um, and generally speaking, if you need a server somewhere, you're going to be paying someone for the server somewhere. And there's most commonly, well, it's three, but there's most commonly two types of servers that are available. There's shared web servers, which are the cheap kinds you see. They're like, $5 a month or something like that. And Xojo web apps really don't run on those. They're often very tightly controlled, don't have the appropriate things installed to allow a Xojo web app to work. So shared web servers are almost always out of the question. Virtual private servers essentially give you your own installation of something, almost always Linux, and you can do whatever the heck you want on it. You purchase some allocation of RAM, some allocation of disk space and bandwidth or whatnot, and then you install whatever you want on it. You configure it however you want. And since you can do all those things, that's almost always the best way to run Xojo web apps. But that does require you to know how to do that configuration. And because a fair amount of those servers are Linux based, it becomes a bit tricky for people who don't have a lot of experience configuring Linux web servers, obviously. The Xojo Cloud is going to be a way to completely get rid of that complexity for you. Behind the scenes, it's going to be a Linux VPS, but you're not going to need to know about that or configure anything like that. Essentially, you're going to come into Xojo and you got a web app. Oh, I already have one selected. You go down to the build settings, you'll see something down here that says something along the lines of Xojo Cloud or whatnot, and you'll check the box, and you'll have a few settings over here on the right, and then when you hit the build button, it'll deploy it up to the website, to the web server for you automatically, and that's pretty much it. You won't have to worry about anything else. So obviously that is going to be really, really cool and incredibly easy to use, and we can't wait to get it out there, but we are still working on it. And a follow-up to that long-winded answer from me was, does it require any particular software from us, or does it run on IIS, Apache, etc.? There you go. Yeah, Xojo web apps interface great with Apache if you compile them or build them as CGI. So you would come down to the share setting here. You can see there's two options for deployment types, CGI and standalone. CGI web apps have to interface with an existing web server that's on the server itself. Apache works best. Some people have been able to get IIS to work, but IIS does not love working with CGI and some of the other things. It really likes working with Microsoft's own tool sets, so that configuration can be a bit more complicated than some might like. And then if you do a standalone, you don't have to interface with anything. You just copy the build up, run it, so it's running, leave it running, and then you can connect to it via a port. All right, it looks like Geoff has popped in here stealthily. He didn't let me know, so I am going to see if I can click on him and turn him into a panelist. And
Paul?
I think I might have heard
Paul?
Geoff. Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So everyone else can hear Geoff, I hope. And welcome, Geoff. Anything
Thanks.
exciting been announced by Apple in the half hour we've been chatting over here?
Well, they've been talking about iOS 7 shipping on the 18th, and they're talking about the iPhone 5C at the moment.
So rumors have been true.
Yeah, multiple colors, lower cost, and that they're doing away with the iPhone 5, so it'll be the 5C and whatever replaces the iPhone 5.
Which they
Whereas
have.
in the past they kept the previous generation around and sold it at a lower price, but they're not doing that this time. So
All right, great. There you go. Even better than Tim Cook is hearing Geoff Perlman give Apple iPhone announcements. All right, let's see here. Everyone apparently isn't in awe that you have arrived, Geoff, because the questions have come to a complete standstill, uh, which is crazy.
okay.
But we've had some good questions here about obviously iOS and general doing things within Xojo. And certainly now's your chance, folks. If you have specific questions you want to ask Geoff that he may choose to answer and may not, by all means, ask away now.
Paul, how many people do we have today?
Well, let me see here. Let me bring up that dashboard pane. Looks like we have 16 here today,
Oh, good.
which is a very high percentage of the people who registered. Usually it's about 50% of the people who register show up to the webinars, and that would be, I think,
Which Dana tells me is pretty typical. I mean, not just for us, but that's just webinar statistics in general. Is that if you get about 50%. Although I think we've had it as high as like 90%, right? For
I
one or
think
two.
the peak has been in the 80s, yeah.
Okay. All right. So, so what kind of questions? I guess while we're waiting for our first question, what kind of questions have we had about iOS, for example, since this is an iOS day for
Yes,
Apple?
exactly. That's how I started this off here. This is iOS Day, and we can talk about iOS too. Well, I certainly pointed everyone to your blog post. I'm sure that's what everyone is doing now, and is probably watching this in the background where they're hearing me talk. But some of the questions were, a lot of people are very excited to see this. How are we handling app distribution on iOS itself, debugging, uh, fairly specific stuff we can't really get into. A fair amount of questions on graphics and if we're going to be supporting OpenGL or any 2D graphics packages. So stuff along those lines.
Okay.
Let's see, we do have a couple questions that are starting to show up here. And a name I may completely mess up again, but it looks like Fotis is asking, do we have any forecast to have HTTPS, which is secure access to standalone web apps?
HTTP, yeah, that's absolutely something that we have on the list. I couldn't tell you exactly when, but it's actually a pretty important thing for us. So, yes, it's absolutely on the list for the web framework.
All right, great. And we got a question here from Mars, and he is asking, and someone has already previously asked Geoff, as you might expect, about, what our thoughts are regarding Android support. And this related question is someone asking about Windows RT support, which I presume would mean the Windows Phone 8 mobile or whatever they're calling that these days.
Well, so let's start with Android. Android is something we're very interested in supporting. The challenge with Android is that Android depends on Java, and to convert your code into Java bytecode, the compiler needs to be the front end of our compiler needs to be spitting out a very high level bytecode. And right now it spits out a fairly low-level bytecode that is then converted at compile time into machine code for whatever processor. Obviously, we can't convert to machine code for Android, so we need this high-level bytecode, and the current front end for the compiler doesn't do that. So we're working on making some changes to the compiler, and at the same time that we're working on updating the compiler for 64-bit, we're working on making it so the compiler can output a higher-level bytecode that we can eventually use to translate into Java bytecode, and then, of course, translate into a lower-level bytecode for things like iOS and Intel processors. So it's a bigger job to do Android because of Java, but we've got a strategy for doing that, and we're kind of fitting that into our plans in terms of the improvements we're making for the compiler.
All right, and Mara's question was specifically about the Windows RT.
Oh, right, Windows RT. We're kind of taking a wait and see mode there. We're not getting a lot of requests from customers to support Windows RT. We got our hands full right now with iOS, and we're gonna, of course, get that out there, and then get started with Android, and then we'll see if with Microsoft buying the phone division of Nokia, that could potentially change things. And if it does, and we get a lot of requests for it, then we'll certainly consider it.
All right, let's see here. Got a few more questions that are popping in the queue. Here's a more specific one from Oblio. Will iOS support allow access to things like address book?
Well, probably. I mean, eventually it will. We're trying to keep the feature list for the first release, as small as we can, and still make it functional, so we can ship. So if we don't have that in the first version, I'm sure we'll add it in some subsequent version. And again, based on feedback. So once it's out and you know what the initial feature set is, you should definitely get those feature requests in, the things that you want.
Okay. Mark
also, sorry. Let me actually say one more thing about that. There probably will be a way for you to do sort of the equivalent of declares. So if there's something that we don't have built-in access to, it's not like you'll be completely cut off from accessing it. You might have to do a little more work to do it yourself, but at least you'll be able to do it. And then in future releases, we'll add support, more direct support for the things that are most widely used.
All right, I have a longer question here from Marcus. I just need to digest this so I can repeat it accurately. But the gist of it seems to be that he's asking, from a Xojo perspective, is it more important that we have our controls work consistently on all platforms, or that they are more platform native for each platform? And the example he's citing here is, for example, label. There's a difference between OS 10 and Windows, where on OS 10 it wraps if there's long text, but on Windows it does not wrap. And I guess he's asking for a general, what's our philosophy? Do we try to make them all work the same, or do we try to stick more with native type behavior?
Yeah, and what I would say is, first of all, there's no one hard, answer to that. I mean, there's not one definitive policy, but overall, what we prefer is the native experience over an experience that's going to be the same on all platforms. In other words, what we want to provide you as a developer is something that's going to be consistent across all platforms. Events are the same, APIs are the same, that kind of thing. We do provide some things where, hey, this is only available on Windows, or this is only available on the Mac. So we provide you access to those features, but generally we provide you with a consistent user experience in terms of the way you build an app and the APIs you use and that kind of thing. But when it comes to your customer, your end user, what they want is an application that feels native to the platform it's on. So in that area, we go for the native experience. So if a control behaves a little differently on a different platform, that's okay. I hope that answers the question.
Well, it sounds like it does. You're getting some cheering in the background here from Gavin, who is chanting native, native, native. So apparently,
yeah. Well, we're as you can tell, I didn't count how many times I said the word native in the demo video today, but it was a lot. So we really believe that native makes the most sense for the end user, because that means that we are leveraging the operating system that the app is running on, and it means that the app, so as the operating system gets new features, then your app can get new features without us having to do anything. But it also means that the user experience for the end user of your app, is going to be more consistent with other apps they use. And I think that this, as I mentioned in the video, or I guess on the blog, that this is going to be a big advantage for us with iOS, because there are a lot of development tools that do iOS where they don't actually use native controls. They use pictures and things. And so they're having to mimic the user experience, and there's no way to get that exactly right. And then the new operating system, like iOS 7 comes out, and a lot of behaviors and look and feel have changed, and so suddenly that shortcut that they took for themselves ends up hurting them in the long run and hurting their users. So we have always believed in native controls. It doesn't mean we never have a custom control, but our philosophy is that if there's a native control, let's use that. And I think that's what provides the best end user experience.
All right. Well, speaking of Gavin, he has a question after his chant here that says, what are our thoughts on iCloud support? And I didn't specifically mention anything in general, whether desktop, web, or iOS, but there it is.
Yeah. So we haven't really thought about building anything in specifically for iCloud. At this point, I'd say that that would be a great third-party opportunity. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all I could say about it at this point. Really, iCloud right now is being used mostly for syncing and things like that. So I think that there's just a limited number of apps that are going to benefit from iCloud. It doesn't mean there aren't enough, but I think that that's something we would, at this point, leave up to the third-party community.
Right, and iCloud, of course, is Apple-specific, which doesn't help people that are building non-Apple apps. And
right, but that's okay. I mean, we do provide access to things like we provide access to the registry on Windows, for example. So, we provide platform-specific stuff. I've seen cross-platform tools in the past where they said, if we can't provide it cross-platform, we're not going to provide it all, and that's not our philosophy. But on the other hand, we have to pick and choose. We can't provide everything, so we have to choose very carefully the areas of focus.
And I will point out for people that Dropbox did recently announce kind of their own developer sync API that is fully cross-platform. It might be something else to consider looking into as well.
Yeah.
All right, let's see here. Here's a question from Opengl about editable movies, something that we do currently have deprecated in Zojo. And will we be essentially migrating that to something like AV Foundation, at least on OS X?
I don't know if and when we ever will do that. I know that my understanding is that Apple has deprecated a lot of the APIs, and that what they've provided isn't nearly what the old API had. So there really would be no way for us to migrate to that. What we'd have to do instead is just provide a new API. And I think they're not doing anything cross-platform in that respect anymore either. So my initial thought would be, no, we probably wouldn't. And my guess is there would be a plugin or a library that you could use. Certainly, if we got tons of requests for it, we'd reconsider. But at this point, Apple has changed the whole QuickTime story in terms of APIs for editing a great deal, which makes it challenging for us.
And to certainly also reiterate, they are deprecated, but they're going to be remaining in Zojo, at least for 32-bit apps for the foreseeable future, as long as Apple continues to support that stuff. So
right.
You'll be able to still use it. All right, I do have another comment here from Oblio that's notes that you mentioned, Geoff, that iCloud would be a great third-party opportunity, and apparently the Monkey Bread folks already have some level of iCloud support in their plugin suite. So there you go. That's
there you go.
So you can check. All right, I got one more question here. Is there anything you'd care to say about Zojo as a company, outlook into the future?
We've been around a long time, and we've always adapted to the needs of people that want to write software. We started out just on building Mac apps. And even back then, when we first started, we knew we were going to provide the ability to build Windows apps, but we also knew that if we waited until we finished that, we might not ever ship. And the first rule of being in the software business is you must ship. So, and then we added Linux and then the web, and now we're working on mobile, and we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to look at what platforms are important, and our vision has always been and continues to be that it just doesn't make sense to us that you have to learn all these different technologies and all these different languages and tools to build different types of software. That there's a lot of people out there that want to learn a language in a development environment and be able to deploy apps on a whole variety of different platforms. And obviously you can't deploy on every possible platform. We don't support the Apple II, for example, but we support the relevant ones, or are in the process of doing that. So we'll continue to do that. We're looking at some other things. We're looking at the possibility of supporting things like Raspberry Pi and maybe Arduino. That's a possibility once we have ARM support, because those use ARM processors. So, we'll see.
All right, great. I got, let's see. Oblio is very interested in future Apple II support. Just so you know, there's one feedback request there. And Marcus is asking if, and I, off the top of my head, I think we probably have done this in the past, but I can't think of an example. Do we ever consider implementing controls just for one platform when there's no reasonable alternative on other platforms?
Sure. If we had a control that was just for a single platform, we would absolutely, and it was important, we absolutely would do it on any platform. Somehow I think we've done this in the past, but
I also feel like we've done this in the past, but I'm having trouble thinking of an example at the moment.
Yeah, but to answer your question, absolutely. If there was a control that we thought was really important and it was only for Windows or only for Mac or whatever, we absolutely would consider that. I mean, look at iOS, just as an example. There's a series in the demo, we broke down the controls by these ones are multi-platform, these ones are iOS specific. So we've got half a dozen controls that are going to be only for iOS and not for OS 10 or Windows or the web or whatever, because they are specific. So if we haven't done it in the past, and Paul and I are just misremembering, we're certainly going to be doing it in the future. So,
I bet it's, Geoff, is that we're remembering the past because we've seen the iOS stuff, before these guys have. So we're thinking about it.
That could be, but I just remember something that was like Mac specific, but I'm not sure.
Zojo's been around so long, it's hard to remember everything.
Well, and we do have those flags you can set, to indicate whether or not a particular things should be included on the desktop, on the web, in the console. So we could do the same thing and have a control that only gets included if you're building for a specific platform.
All right, and we've got a couple more questions. Let me just check for time here. Yeah, we got a few more minutes so we can get to these last couple questions. Will iOS do scaling in any way?
What does that mean?
Yeah, I also am not entirely sure what that means. So we'll move on to the next one, and maybe Oblio can add a little more clarification to that. Let's see, deprecated controls. Would it be possible for Xojo to consider making controls that are deprecated open source?
Probably not. Controls often are, the way they're implemented is often deeply embedded into our internal framework, which we aren't open sourcing. So there might not be a lot of code there that you could do much with. If we felt that there was and that there'd be a benefit, we'd certainly consider it. But if we don't open source something, that's usually because there's just not, we'd have to open source our framework, which we're not going to do.
All right, and Oblio has followed up with a scaling question. He's asking about screen resolutions. Would iOS scale for different screen resolutions? I don't know that it scales now in general, but
I think what he's talking about is, like I know Apple and Windows both have the ability to have resolution independent layouts, and we're certainly interested in supporting that. Where you're doing things in, I think it's points instead of pixels, so that as the screen resolution changes, you wouldn't notice the difference. And certainly that's the case with Retina, right? Like if you have a Retina MacBook Pro, which is what I happen to have. And we are certainly interested in supporting Retina. So yes, I mean the short answer is that screen resolution independence is something we absolutely want to support, and it should be supported in a way that you really don't have to deal with it, with the exception maybe of if you use images in your apps.
And it sounds like that would be somewhat related to the auto layout stuff that has been talked about before.
Well, auto layout's more about the size, the dimensions. What he's talking about, I believe, is the screen resolution itself. So the difference between like a regular screen and a regular MacBook Pro and a Retina MacBook Pro, for example.
All right. Yep. Yeah. He just said, "Yep, that's it." So it sounds like
and we absolutely are interested in that. And that's a shorter term goal than a longer term goal for us. So.
All right, and Gavin has more of a comment here, and he says he's definitely looking forward to Retina support in the IDE and in apps that it builds. And I would just add that you can certainly create Retina apps using Xojo today.
Yeah, it's a little more challenging. There's some third-party stuff you need, or declares or whatever. But we want to make it so that it's just built in. And to comment on what Gavin said, I work all day long on a Retina MacBook Pro, and the only app I think that I use that doesn't support Retina is the IDE itself. So I'm very motivated to see us have Retina support. I think Retina is going to be a bigger and bigger, feature of future Macs. So I definitely want to see us support it.
All right, and just a last question here from Oblio is he is very excited for iOS and curious about how he might get on a beta to help test that when it's available.
Well, the answer there is if you've got a active Xojo Pro license, then you automatically have access to the beta channel on the forum. And once we have a beta available, that's where we'll make it available. So if you want to be in the beta, just make sure you've got a Xojo Pro license.
All right, I have a great reminder from Marcus to run my surveys that I constantly forget. So, or my polls as they are. So I'm going to run those now, and you should see them on the screen. I have two, it looks like. So we'll run through this one, and then we'll run the other one. I think Marcus might have also reminded me last week, so he is now my official survey reminder guy. And if I forget, it's entirely his fault. Yeah, Gavin is noting that the survey does not work on the iPhone client, and I think that's true. When I tested this on the iPad, I had the same sort of problem that the surveys didn't quite work right on the iOS clients. And someone is asking, what is a legacy key? Is that an active key? I believe legacy key just refers to a pre-Xojo key, so something like Real Studio or Real Basic.
Yeah, pre-Zojo key. I guess I'm considered an attendee, so I should probably fill out the survey, huh?
It'll count in the percentage here. All right.
Oh, I can't actually fill it out.
Maybe you can if you're a panelist. That's
Yeah, I
I've
can't.
not tested
So,
it.
and I can't close the window either.
All
Interestingly
right. Well, I'm
enough.
going to close this poll here, and I will start the next poll. And this one's easier. It just looks like it has two questions. All right, that one filled up quickly. And looks like we've reached the end of the webinar, so I will just do my closing thing. Since this was the iOS related Q&A, I do want to point out to people that the Zojo books, the user guide, and the quick starts and the tutorials are all available in the iBook store for viewing on your iPad. And as soon as Apple announces the release date for Mavericks, also in Mavericks, which has an iBook reader. And next week's webinar, which already has quite a few people signed up, is using the list box. I get a lot of questions and requests for information about this. So if you haven't already registered, please do so. And we'll be going over a demo project that covers a wide variety of the events, methods, properties of Listbox. We'll do regular ones, hierarchical, show graphics, do all kinds of fun stuff. So I want to thank everyone for attending and thank Geoff for being our special guest this week.
Oh, you're welcome.
And
Good to
everyone,
be here.
have a great rest of your day. And now you can run out and go find out what Apple has been talking about this last hour. Thanks, everyone.